Bikers mocked a K9 during a court hearing, not knowing the dog held the key to their arrest. How will this story escalate? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as the heavy wooden doors swung open, revealing a line of leather-clad men entering with smug grins. The group of bikers, known for their notorious activities in the city, strolled in with exaggerated confidence, their boots echoing against the polished floor. Their leader, a burly man with a scar running across his cheek, smirked as he locked eyes with the prosecutor before taking his seat at the defendant's table. The case against them had been building for months, yet they showed no signs of concern. At the front of the courtroom, Officer Mark Daniels entered with his K9 partner, Rex, a towering German shepherd with piercing eyes and an unmistakable aura of discipline. The moment the dog stepped in, the bikers chuckled among themselves. One of them, a lanky man with tattoos creeping up his neck, whispered something to his friend, eliciting laughter from the group. They saw nothing but a glorified pet standing before them, completely unaware that the very animal they mocked was about to turn their world upside down. The judge's gavel struck the podium, calling for silence. "Court is now in session," he announced. "We will begin the hearing of the people versus Randall Hayes and Associates." The lead biker, Randall Hayes, leaned back in his chair with an arrogant smirk. "Let's get this over with," he muttered under his breath. The prosecutor wasted no time. "Your Honor, the evidence presented today will prove beyond a doubt that these men have been running an organized crime syndicate, trafficking illegal substances and weapons throughout the city." Mark, standing tall beside Rex, listened carefully as the prosecutor laid out the case. The bikers still seemed unfazed, exchanging smirks and rolling their eyes. That was until the prosecutor turned toward Mark. "Officer Daniels, could you please explain the role your K9 partner played in this investigation?" Mark took a deep breath and patted Rex's side. "Of course," he began. "Rex has been a part of this department for 6 years. His skills in detection are unparalleled, and it was his instincts that led us to the primary evidence that linked the defendants to their illegal operations." A scoff echoed from the defendant's table. One of the bikers leaned forward, arms crossed. "You're telling me this mutt cracked the case? Give me a break." A few chuckles rippled through the group, but Mark remained unfazed. Instead, he gestured toward the bailiff, who retrieved a series of images and documents, placing them before the judge. "This," Mark continued, pointing at a photograph, "is a storage unit that our department had under surveillance. We suspected it was being used to house illegal contraband, but we lacked the probable cause to search it. Until Rex came into the picture." The bikers' laughter faded slightly as Mark continued. "During a routine patrol near the docks, Rex detected something unusual near one of the crates. He was relentless, signaling repeatedly that there was something inside. When we opened it, we found multiple shipments of unregistered firearms, all traceable back to the defendants." The smugness began to drain from the bikers' faces. "That's not all," Mark added, stepping closer. Rex also identified a specific scent trail that led directly to one of the bikers' safe houses, where we recovered financial records linking their transactions to international trafficking rings. The room fell into silence. Randall's fingers tapped against the table, his jaw tightening. His confidence was cracking. He turned to his lawyer, whispering something in hushed tones. The judge reviewed the documents carefully before glancing up. "This is compelling evidence," he said sternly, "and it was discovered legally, through the assistance of an expertly trained police K9. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Your Honor, given this overwhelming evidence, the state moves for an immediate ruling on these charges." Randall shot up from his seat, his face darkening. "This is ridiculous," he barked. "You're telling me I'm gonna go down because of some dog?" The judge's gavel struck once more. "That dog just provided undeniable proof of your involvement in criminal activities. I suggest you start taking this seriously." The bikers looked at one another, their confidence evaporating with each passing second. Meanwhile, Rex sat calmly by Mark's side, his ears perked, his eyes steady. The very animal they had mocked now stood as the key witness that would put them behind bars. And for the first time that day, the bikers finally understood the weight of their situation. Here's the next batch of the structured flowing script. The air in the courtroom grew heavier as the reality of the situation settled in. The bikers, who had strutted in with unchecked arrogance, were now shifting in their seats, their once smug expressions replaced with unease. Their lawyer, a sharp-suited man with a practiced calm, leaned in to whisper urgently to Randall Hayes, but he simply clenched his jaw, refusing to acknowledge the weight of the evidence against him. The prosecutor continued, unfazed by the outburst. "Your Honor, let's move to the next piece of evidence. Officer Daniels, could you explain how Rex played a role in the warehouse raid?" Mark nodded, his posture firm. "Absolutely. After Rex identified the illegal firearms in the storage unit, our team began surveillance on the bikers' warehouse. We had reason to believe they were stockpiling more than just weapons. However, we needed a solid reason to enter without tipping them off. That's where Rex came in." Mark gestured toward the bailiff, who handed over another stack of documents to the judge. During a routine perimeter check, Rex indicated the presence of a large quantity of narcotics hidden within the structure. Based on his detection, we were able to obtain a warrant, and what we found inside changed the course of this investigation. One of the bikers muttered a curse under his breath, while another shot an accusatory glance at Randall. The tension between them was visible. The prosecutor walked over to the defense table, placing a thick file in front of them. Inside that warehouse, officers found over $15 million worth of illegal drugs, packaged, labeled, and ready for distribution. And guess what? The fingerprints found on those packages match each and every one of the defendants sitting in this courtroom. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room as the biker's lawyer furiously flipped through the pages. Randall clenched his fists, his face reddening. The prosecutor turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the defendants can mock Rex all they want, but the fact remains. Without this K9, these men would have continued to poison this city with their illegal operations. And let me remind the court, this is not just about drugs or weapons. These men have ties to violent offenses, intimidation tactics, and even suspected homicide cases." Mark met Randall's burning glare without flinching. "Rex isn't just a police dog," he continued. "He's a hero who prevented these men from continuing their reign of crime." Randall shot up from his seat, slamming his fists onto the table. "This is a damn setup," he roared. "That dog, he's just an animal. You're pinning this on us with no real proof." The judge, clearly unamused by Randall's outburst, raised a hand for silence. "Mr. Hayes, you will remain seated, or I will hold you in contempt of court." Randall, breathing heavily, sat back down, but his knee bounced rapidly under the table. His lawyer was furiously whispering to him again, but his attention was fixed on Mark and Rex. The judge sighed, rubbing his temples. "Officer Daniels, does Rex have any other direct involvement in this case?" Mark gave a small nod before glancing at the prosecutor. "Yes, Your Honor," the prosecutor replied. "This next piece of evidence is the most damning of all." The room fell into a dead silence. The bailiff brought over a small USB drive, plugging it into the courtroom's monitor. A grainy security video appeared on the screen. "This footage was retrieved from the warehouse's surveillance system," the prosecutor explained. "It was recorded just 2 nights before the bust. I asked the court to pay close attention to what happens next." The video played. On the screen, the bikers could be seen entering the warehouse, moving between the rows of crates filled with illegal goods. A conversation played out in hushed tones. Then suddenly, an argument erupted. Randall could be seen shoving another biker, yelling something indistinct. Then the camera caught something chilling. One of the bikers, a younger man with a jagged scar on his eyebrow, reached for a gun. But before he could raise it, Randall pulled his own and fired. The man crumpled instantly. Gasps filled the courtroom. The camera captured the bikers scrambling, some shouting, others standing in shock. And then came the final piece of damning evidence. Rex. The footage showed Mark and Rex arriving at the scene moments later. Rex had led them straight to the warehouse, his instincts guiding them even before the officers knew what had happened. Rex had been the one to uncover the murder weapon. The screen froze on the moment Mark and his K9 partner burst through the doors, catching the criminals red-handed. The weight of the evidence was undeniable. The prosecutor turned toward the defense table. Your Honor, not only does this footage prove these men were running an illegal operation, but it also directly implicates Mr. Hayes in the murder of his own associate. Without Rex, we might never have uncovered this crime. The courtroom was silent. Randall's face had gone pale. His hands, which had been clenched into fists, now trembled slightly. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Hayes, do you have anything to say in your defense? Randall swallowed, but no words came. The prosecutor smiled. No further questions, Your Honor. Rex sat at Mark's side, watching the room with calm, knowing eyes. The same men who had mocked him moments ago were now crumbling under the weight of the truth. And the K9 they had laughed at had just sealed their fate. The judge exhaled sharply, looking over the room with an expression that held both exhaustion and authority. Given the overwhelming evidence presented today, I am ready to make a ruling. He turned to the defense table where Randall Hayes and his crew sat frozen, their once defiant postures deflating. Their lawyer was still frantically flipping through his notes, as if hoping to find some loophole that could save them. But everyone in the courtroom knew there was none. The court finds all defendants guilty on all charges, including conspiracy, illegal arms trafficking, drug distribution, and, in the case of Mr. Hayes, second-degree murder, the judge announced, his voice firm and unwavering. Sentencing will be carried out next week, but I can assure you, given the severity of these crimes, justice will be served. A murmur swept through the spectators, some whispering in shock, others nodding in satisfaction. The bikers sat motionless, the reality of their fate sinking in. Randall, who had once carried himself with an air of untouchable power, now looked small, trapped, his arrogance shattered beyond repair. As the bailiffs moved forward to take the convicted men into custody, Randall finally snapped. You set me up. This is all a setup, he bellowed, struggling against the officers. His face was red with fury, veins popping in his neck. That damn dog. This was rigged from the start. Rex, standing proudly at Mark's side, let out a low growl as if responding to Randall's accusations. His eyes, calm but alert, followed the biker's every move. The judge slammed his gavel down. Enough, Mr. Hayes. Another outburst, and I'll hold you in contempt. Randall clenched his jaw, glaring at Mark. You and that mutt, he spat. You think you're heroes? You think you've won? Mark didn't flinch. Instead, he gave Randall the same measured, steady look that had unsettled so many criminals before him. Rex doesn't care about winning, he said simply. He just does what's right. The officers finally subdued Randall, leading him and his gang toward the side doors where they would be processed and taken to a maximum security facility. The courtroom remained eerily silent as the sound of heavy footfalls and clinking handcuffs echoed through the chamber. Only when the last biker was escorted out did the tension in the air begin to dissipate. Mark reached down, scratching Rex behind the ears. Good work, buddy, he murmured. Rex's tail wagged slightly, but his demeanor remained professional, as if he knew his job wasn't quite done. The prosecutor approached Mark with a nod of appreciation. That was one hell of a takedown. I have to say, I've seen a lot of cases come through this courtroom, but your K9, he's something else. Mark smiled, glancing down at his partner. Yeah, he's the best. The judge cleared his throat, looking directly at Mark. Officer Daniels, I hope you understand the gravity of what you and Rex have accomplished today. You didn't just take down a gang. You dismantled an empire of crime that's plagued this city for years. Mark nodded respectfully. We're just doing our jobs, Your Honor. The judge chuckled, shaking his head. Somehow, I think Rex might deserve more than just the title of doing his job. I suspect this case will be studied for a long time. Mark knelt down beside Rex, rubbing his fur with a rare moment of tenderness. What do you think, buddy? He murmured. You up for another one? Rex gave a single, confident bark. The entire courtroom erupted in laughter. Even in the most serious of moments, Rex had a way of reminding everyone that justice wasn't just about laws and sentences. It was about loyalty, courage, and the unwavering pursuit of what was right. As Mark and Rex left the courthouse, stepping into the bright afternoon sun, reporters swarmed around them, cameras flashing and microphones shoved forward. "Officer Daniels, how does it feel knowing your K9 partner single-handedly took down one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the city? Will Rex be receiving any awards for his service? What's next for you two?" Mark simply gave a small smile, placing a hand on Rex's back as they walked toward their patrol car. "This isn't about awards," he said. "It's about making sure the streets are safe. And as long as Rex and I have each other, we'll always be ready for the next case." With that, he opened the door, and Rex leapt into the passenger seat, settling into his usual position like the true professional he was. As the engine roared to life and they pulled away, one thing was clear. This wasn't just the end of a case. It was the beginning of a legend. Mark sat quietly in his squad car, staring at the glowing city skyline ahead. The courthouse drama had settled, but his mind was still buzzing with everything that had transpired. Rex sat beside him, panting slightly, his ears alert as if waiting for the next command. The German Shepherd wasn't just his partner. He was the reason Mark had made it this far in his career. The phone buzzed in the cup holder, snapping him out of his thoughts. He reached for it and saw a message from the precinct. "Great work today, Daniels. The DA wants you in tomorrow morning. Something big is coming." Mark sighed, leaning back in his seat. "Something big," he muttered. "It never ended. Crime never slept in this city." Rex let out a small huff, nudging Mark's arm with his nose. He knew his partner was lost in thought. Mark looked over and smirked. Yeah, I get it. No dwelling on things, right?" Rex's tail thumped against the seat in response. Deciding to clear his head, Mark started the car, heading towards the K9 training facility. Rex had earned a reward, his favorite chew toy and some well-deserved playtime. The next morning, Mark found himself in the chief's office. Captain Hughes leaned back in his chair, arms folded, studying him closely. "You really stirred things up yesterday," Hughes said, tapping his pen against the desk. Mark nodded. "Just doing my job," the captain scoffed. "Don't play modest. That takedown wasn't just any bust. You didn't just put Randall Hayes behind bars, you took down a network. There are a lot of powerful people who aren't happy about that." Mark frowned. "You saying I should have let him walk?" Hughes shook his head. "No, I'm saying you need to watch your back. The kind of people who backed Randall don't take kindly to losing. And they know exactly who to blame." Mark's jaw clenched. He had seen retaliation cases before. Gangs didn't just fall apart when their leader got locked up. There was always someone waiting in the wings, eager to reclaim control. "Any threats?" he asked. Hughes slid a file across the desk. "We intercepted some chatter on the dark web. A bounty's been placed on you on Rex." Mark's fingers tightened around the file. His blood ran cold. A bounty on his K9 partner? That was a new level of low. Rex, lying obediently beside him, sensed the shift in the room. His ears perked up, his posture straightening. Hughes sighed. "Look, you're a damn good cop, Mark, but I need you to lay low for a while. Let things settle. Take some time off." Mark exhaled sharply. "And do what?" "Sit at home while a target's painted on my back." "That's an order," Hughes said firmly. "We'll be monitoring threats. But for now, you and Rex are benched." Mark opened his mouth to argue, but Hughes raised a hand. "This isn't a punishment, Daniels. It's protection." Mark clenched his jaw but nodded. He knew better than to fight orders from the captain. That night, Mark sat on his apartment balcony, a beer in one hand, absent-mindedly scratching behind Rex's ears with the other. "What do you think, buddy?" he muttered. "They want us to lay low." Rex whined softly, tilting his head. Mark chuckled bitterly. "Yeah, I don't like it either." He took another sip, then set the bottle down. The city below bustled with life. Cars honking, people shouting, the distant wail of sirens. Crime didn't stop, and neither could he. A A sharp knock at the door made both him and Rex sit up. Mark reached for his gun, creeping toward the peephole. A familiar voice spoke through the wood. "Daniels, open up." "It's me," Mark exhaled, unlocking the door. Detective Sarah Lawson stood on the other side, arms crossed. "We need to talk." She stepped in, glancing at Rex, who sniffed her before wagging his tail slightly. "You weren't at the precinct today," she said. Mark sighed. "Yeah. Hughes put me on leave." "I know." She leaned against the counter. "That's why I'm here." Mark raised an eyebrow. She pulled out a folder and slid it across the counter. "I dug deeper. That gang Randall ran is bigger than we thought." Mark opened the file, scanning through the pages. His stomach tightened. "Someone's pulling the strings," Sarah continued. "Randall was never the real boss, just a puppet. And whoever's at the top, they're still out there." Mark clenched his fists. "And they want us dead." Sarah nodded grimly. "Which means you and Rex can't afford to sit this one out." Mark looked down at Rex, who stared back at him with the same unwavering determination. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Mark closed the file slowly, his mind racing. The implications were clear. Randall Hayes had been just a pawn in a much larger game. And now, whoever had been pulling the strings was still out there, looking to eliminate loose ends. Mark and Rex were at the top of that list. Sarah exhaled, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Look, I know Hughes wants you to lay low, but we both know that's not an option. The longer we sit around, the more time they have to plan their next move." Mark nodded, rubbing his chin. "What's the next step?" She leaned in. "We track the money." Hayes wasn't operating alone. There are transactions, accounts funneling cash into his operations. If we follow the flow, we find the real boss. Mark tapped his fingers against the counter, deep in thought. "You have access to those accounts?" Sarah hesitated before nodding. "Unofficially. But if we do this, we're on our own. No backup, no department support." Mark glanced down at Rex, who was still sitting attentively, ears perked. The dog could sense the tension in the room. Mark knew that if they went down this path, there was no turning back. "All right," he said finally. "Let's do it." Sarah exhaled in relief. "Good, because I already pulled some intel." Mark smirked. "You knew I'd say yes." "Of course," she said with a small grin. "You never were one to sit still." She pulled out a tablet and placed it on the counter. Mark leaned over, scanning the information on the screen. There were multiple offshore accounts, each one linked to dummy corporations. But one name caught his eye: Dominic Carver. Mark's stomach tightened. "Carver," he muttered. Sarah nodded grimly. "He's been operating in the shadows for years. Drugs, arms dealing, human trafficking, he's involved in everything. And guess what? Every major transaction in Randall's network traces back to him." Mark clenched his fists. "And no one's ever been able to pin him down." "Until now," Sarah said. "We have a shot, Mark. But we need to move fast." Mark stood up, grabbing his jacket. "Then let's move." Rex instantly rose to his feet, sensing the shift in his partner's energy. He knew they were going on a mission. Sarah hesitated. "Are you sure about this?" Mark met her gaze. "There's no choice. If we don't take him down now, we never will." She nodded, grabbing her car keys. "Then let's go." They drove in silence, the tension thick in the air. Mark kept his eyes on the road while Sarah tapped furiously on her phone, pulling up more data. "We have a location," she said. "One of Carver's men, Greg Lasky, runs a front out of an old warehouse in the industrial district. If we get to him, we might be able to flip him." Mark nodded. "Then that's where we start." As they pulled up to the darkened warehouse, Mark felt the familiar surge of adrenaline. The place was quiet, too quiet. Rex let out a low growl from the back seat. Sarah gripped her gun. "Something's not right." Mark reached for his weapon, scanning the area. "Stay sharp." They moved toward the entrance, pressing against the wall as Mark peered inside through a broken window. The place looked abandoned, but there were signs of recent activity. "Someone's been here," he murmured. Sarah nodded. "Let's check it out." They moved inside cautiously, guns drawn. Rex stayed at Mark's side, his body tense, ears flicking back and forth. Then they heard it, a faint rustling from the back room. Mark signaled for Sarah to move in. They flanked the door, pressing close to the wall. Mark counted down silently. 3, 1. He kicked the door open. Inside, Greg Lasky was bound to a chair, bloodied and barely conscious. Sarah rushed forward. Lasky? He lifted his head weakly, eyes filled with fear. Why, you have to get out of here, he rasped. Mark's instincts screamed at him. It's a trap. The moment he spoke, the lights in the warehouse flickered on, flooding the space with blinding brightness. A voice echoed from the shadows. Well, Detective Daniels. I was hoping you'd come. Mark turned sharply, gun raised. From the darkness, a tall figure emerged, Dominic Carver. He was dressed sharply in a tailored suit, his expression calm, almost amused. You just don't know when to quit, do you? Carver smirked. Sarah shifted beside Mark, her grip tightening on her weapon. Carver held up a hand. Now, let's not get hasty. You've walked right into my domain. You really think you're walking out of here alive? Mark didn't flinch. That depends. You willing to bet against me? Carver chuckled. I like you, Daniels. You've got guts. But unfortunately, that won't save you. The doors behind them slammed shut. Mark's heart pounded. They were trapped. Mark didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, he spun around, gun raised, scanning for hostiles. Rex let out a guttural snarl, his hackles raised. Sarah had her weapon aimed at Carver, but the crime lord remained eerily calm, watching them as if he already knew how the night would end. You're outnumbered, Carver said smoothly, stepping forward. My men have the exits sealed. You and your little dog here? You're not leaving this building alive. Sarah's jaw clenched. You talk too much. She fired first. The bullet grazed Carver's shoulder, sending him stumbling back with a curse. Chaos erupted. Gunfire rang through the warehouse as men emerged from the shadows, firing indiscriminately. Mark shoved Sarah behind a stack of crates, using the brief moment of cover to return fire. Rex lunged forward with the force of a trained predator. He sank his teeth into the arm of a gunman who had moved too close, yanking him down with brutal efficiency. The man screamed, his weapon clattering to the floor. Mark pivoted, kicking it out of reach before firing twice into another approaching assailant. The room was a battlefield, gunfire flashing in bursts of yellow and orange, shadows dancing violently against the concrete walls. Mark reloaded quickly, breathing hard. We need an exit now. Sarah crouched low, checking her magazine. They came in from somewhere. There's got to be another way out. A sudden explosion rocked the building, shaking the floor beneath them. Flames licked up from the far side of the warehouse where a propane tank had been hit. The air filled with the acrid smell of burning chemicals. Smoke curled toward the ceiling. Smoke cover, Mark muttered. We use it, Rex growled, snapping at another attacker who had ventured too close. Mark grabbed a metal pipe and swung hard, connecting with the man's ribs. He collapsed with a grunt. Sarah pointed to a side passage, half obscured by thick black smoke. There, Mark nodded. Go! They sprinted through the fog, dodging bullets as Carver's men shouted orders. Rex stayed close to Mark's side, his instincts guiding him through the chaos. A metal staircase loomed ahead, leading up to what looked like an emergency exit. Mark motioned for Sarah to take the lead. I'll cover you. Go! She hesitated for only a second before charging up the stairs. Mark turned back, firing a few more rounds to keep the gunman at bay. Then he saw Carver. The crime lord was limping, but his gun was raised, aimed directly at Sarah's back. Sarah down, Mark bellowed. Sarah dropped instinctively. Mark fired. The bullet struck Carver square in the chest, the force knocking him backward. He stumbled, eyes wide in shock, before collapsing against the crates, blood pooling beneath him. For a heartbeat, everything went still. Then the reality of the situation crashed back. Move, Mark barked. They reached the exit, bursting into the open air. The night felt shockingly cold after the suffocating heat inside. Sirens wailed in the distance. Backup was finally arriving. Mark doubled over, hands on his knees, catching his breath. Rex sat beside him, panting, his eyes still scanning for threats. Sarah turned to Mark, her expression unreadable. "Did we get him?" Mark exhaled slowly. "Yeah, we got him." The weight of the night settled on them both. They had walked straight into hell and somehow come out the other side. As the police cars screeched to a halt, officers pouring out with weapons drawn, Mark finally allowed himself to breathe. Rex nudged his hand, looking up at him with unwavering loyalty. Mark scratched behind his ears. "Good job, buddy." Sarah nodded, watching as officers moved in to secure the warehouse. The case was closed, but Mark knew this was just another chapter in a long, dangerous war. And with Rex by his side, he was ready for whatever came next. The aftermath of the shootout left the warehouse in ruins. Smoke curled into the night sky as emergency responders rushed to extinguish the flames. The acrid smell of burning chemicals mixed with the scent of blood and gunpowder. Officers moved swiftly, securing the area, cuffing the remaining criminals who hadn't managed to escape. Mark stood near one of the police cruisers, watching as paramedics tended to Sarah's minor injuries. Rex sat beside him, ears perked, watching everything with sharp, intelligent eyes. The K-9 was still on high alert, sensing the lingering tension in the air. Captain Briggs, their commanding officer, strode toward them, his expression unreadable. "Hell of a night," he muttered, taking in the destruction. "You two just couldn't wait for backup? Could you?" Mark smirked, rubbing a hand over his face. "Didn't have much of a choice, sir. If we waited, Carver would have been gone. We had to move." Briggs exhaled sharply, crossing his arms. "And now he's dead." Sarah, stepping up beside Mark, spoke before he could. "We didn't have a choice. He was going to kill us." Briggs regarded them both carefully, then nodded. "You made the call, and from the looks of it, you made the right one. But this whole thing stinks. Carver wasn't just another small-time crime boss. He had connections. Big ones. Someone's going to come looking for payback." Mark stiffened. He knew the type of criminals they were dealing with. Taking one down only made room for another to rise. The power vacuum Carver's death created would inevitably lead to more violence. Briggs sighed. "For now, get yourselves cleaned up. The chief wants a full debrief in the morning." Sarah saluted. "Understood, sir." As Briggs walked away, Mark looked down at Rex, who had been eerily silent since the firefight ended. The dog nudged his hand, sensing his unease. "You okay, partner?" Mark asked, crouching to ruffle the fur on Rex's neck. Rex let out a small whine but held Mark's gaze. The dog had seen combat before, had been in life-or-death situations more times than Mark could count. But something about tonight had shaken him. Sarah knelt beside them. "He's different tonight," she observed. Mark nodded. He knew something was off the second we stepped inside. Maybe he sensed more than we did. Sarah glanced at the warehouse, now a charred skeleton of what it had once been. He's never been wrong before. The sirens had started to die down, but the air was still thick with tension. As Mark stood, he caught sight of an unfamiliar car parked at the far end of the street. A black sedan with tinted windows. Too clean, too inconspicuous. Mark's instincts screamed at him. "Sarah," he murmured, nudging her with his elbow. She followed his gaze. "You see them too?" "Yeah," Mark muttered, narrowing his eyes. The car remained still, but he could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching them. Rex suddenly let out a low growl, his body tensing. Mark's gut twisted. Whoever was inside that car wasn't just an onlooker. They were waiting, watching, and they weren't done with him yet. The black sedan remained parked at the edge of the scene, its presence an unspoken threat lingering in the background. Mark kept his gaze locked on it, his instincts screaming at him that this wasn't over. He had been in the force long enough to know when someone was sizing him up, and whoever was inside that car wasn't just a curious onlooker. They were assessing the situation, deciding their next move. Sarah shifted beside him. "We should check it out," she muttered under her breath. Mark hesitated. Charging up to a potential threat without backup wasn't smart. The night had already taken too many unexpected turns, and they had barely survived the ambush in the warehouse. Still, ignoring it wasn't an option. Rex let out another low growl, his ears pinned back. He had already sensed something was off before they even noticed the car. And Rex's instincts were rarely wrong. "Cover me," Mark said, adjusting his grip on his weapon as he stepped forward. Sarah followed without a word, her own weapon held low but ready. The moment they took a step, the sedan's engine roared to life. The driver, hidden behind the heavily tinted windows, wasted no time peeling away from the curb. "Go, go, go!" Mark shouted, breaking into a sprint. Rex shot forward like a missile, his paws barely touching the pavement as he chased after the vehicle. But the sedan was fast, its tires screeching against the asphalt as it sped off down the street. Mark's heart pounded as he watched it disappear around a corner. There was no way they could catch it on foot. Sarah cursed. "License plate." "Couldn't see," Mark muttered. He turned to Rex, whose breath was heavy from the chase, his body still tense with frustration. The dog hated it when a threat got away. Briggs approached, a grim expression on his face. "What was that?" "Whoever was inside was watching us," Mark answered. "They were waiting for something." Briggs didn't look surprised. Carver had powerful friends. It wouldn't be the first time someone tries to clean up loose ends. Mark's stomach twisted. Loose ends. He and Sarah were now targets. Sarah exhaled sharply. "Great. Just what we need." Briggs nodded. "We'll put out an APB on the vehicle, but don't expect it to turn up. These people don't leave trails. Whatever this was, it's not over." Mark looked down at Rex, whose sharp eyes scanned the area, his body still rigid. The dog knew it too. "They'll come back," Mark muttered. Briggs didn't disagree. "And when they do, you better be ready." The weight of those words settled between them. They had taken down Carver, but in doing so, they had set something much larger in motion. And whoever had been inside that car was only the beginning. Mark clenched his fists, his mind already racing with possibilities. He wasn't one to back down. If a storm was coming, he and Rex would be ready, no matter what it took.